Welcome back, everyone. Tonight's story starts with a girl who didn't know what she was carrying when she walked into that forest. An omega without a pack, without a territory, without a single wolf in the world who had claimed her as theirs. The northern reach had been closed to outsiders for 6 years, sealed by a king who stopped naming things after the last thing he named didn't stay. And somewhere in the frozen dark, between the tree line and the border post, 3 small heartbeats were running out of time. She went in for firewood. She had no idea she was already written into what happened next. Let's begin. The cold that night was the kind that didn't announce itself. It simply arrived, settled into the spaces between things, and waited. Maren had been gathering wood at the edge of the reach for 20 minutes before she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The forest had gone quiet in the particular way forests go quiet when something nearby has stopped fighting. She found them 40 feet from the border post. 3 pups, none older than 4 weeks by the look of them, chained at the neck to an iron stake driven into frozen ground. The chains were thin, the kind used for restraint rather than containment, and they had worn raw lines into fur that was already matted with cold. 2 were still. One was making a sound so small it barely registered as sound at all. Maren set down her wood. She knelt in the snow without thinking about it, without calculating the temperature of the ground or the distance back to the village, or what it meant to touch wolves that had been deliberately left. Her hands were already moving. She worked the first chain free with fingers that had gone numb 10 minutes ago and didn't bother her about it. The pup inside was breathing. Shallow, but breathing. She tucked it against her chest under her coat and started on the second. The third chain was frozen to the stake. She pulled her knife, worked the link apart at the joint, and gathered all 3 against her body in the way she had learned from a healer in a village 3 territories south. Heat transfer, skin contact, slow warming rather than fast. She stood with them held against her and began walking. She didn't think about the border. She thought about the one that was still making the small sound, whether it was getting quieter, whether quiet was better or worse. It was worse. She walked faster. The border gate of the northern reach was iron and old, set between 2 stone pillars that had been standing long enough to have their own weather patterns. The guard on duty was a broad man with a torch, and the expression of someone who had decided in advance that nothing interesting was going to happen tonight. He saw Maren coming out of the dark, with her coat moving in 3 places, and revised that decision. "Borders closed," he said. "I have 3 dying pups," Maren said. "Borders still closed." She stopped in front of him and opened her coat. The firelight caught the 3 small faces. Frost on their muzzles, eyes sealed shut, the one that had been making the sound no longer making it. The guard looked at them for a long moment. Something moved through his face that wasn't policy. "Wait here," he said, and went for the gate. She was inside before he came back. The healer's quarters were 2 buildings past the gate, which Maren knew because she had spent the last 4 days camped at the border's edge, doing the kind of observational work that had kept her alive across 6 territories without a pack to return to. She went directly there, knocked once, and walked in. The healer was a woman of about 60, with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned that time spent being surprised was time wasted. She took in Maren, the coat, the 3 small shapes, and was already moving to the hearth before Maren had finished the sentence. "Found them chained to the border post," Maren said. "Iron stake. They've been there at least 2 hours by the cold in them." "Set them here." The healer had cleared a low table near the fire. "All 3, close as you can get them." Maren laid them down and stepped back. Her hands were shaking now that they didn't need to hold anything. She pressed them flat against her thighs and watched. "You're Omega," the healer said. Not a question. "Yes." "Unaffiliated." "Yes." The healer glanced at her once, briefly, with the kind of look that held a calculation Maren didn't have enough information to read. Then she went back to the pups and didn't say anything else. The smallest one, the one that had gone quiet, made a sound. It was not a large sound, but it was a sound. Maren sat down on the floor near the hearth and let herself breathe. She was still there 2 hours later when the door opened. He didn't announce himself. He simply filled the doorway in the way that certain people fill doorways. Not through size alone, though he was large, broad through the shoulders, with the build of someone who had been doing actual work for a long time, but through the quality of his stillness. He stood like the room had been built around him, and he was only now deciding whether to enter it. His eyes went to the pups first, then to the healer. Then, after a pause that Maren felt in her sternum, to her. "They're stable," the healer said before he asked. "All three. The smallest one will need watching through the night, but she'll hold." She. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that had learned not to rise. He was looking at the smallest pup. "The girl found them at the border post," the healer said. "Chained, iron stake." Something moved through his face. It was not a large movement, but Maren had spent 6 years reading people who didn't want to be read, and she filed it away. The way his jaw set, the particular stillness that came over him that was different from his ordinary stillness, the way his hands, which had been loose at his sides, went flat. "Which post?" he said. "The eastern marker," Maren said. He looked at her again. The look was direct and held longer than most people held looks, and Maren held it back because she had learned that looking away first was a kind of answer she didn't always want to give. "You're not from this territory," he said. "No." "You crossed the border?" "The gate guard let me through." "The border is closed." "I had 3 dying pups," Maren said. "The gate guard made a judgment call. I think he made the right one." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable exactly. It was the silence of someone deciding something. He looked at her for another moment, not assessing, or not only assessing something else underneath it that she didn't have a name for yet. And then he looked back at the pups. "You'll stay," he said, "until morning at least. The healer will need help through the night." It was not a question. It was also not quite a command. It was the kind of sentence that had left a door open while being very clear about which direction it preferred. "All right," Maren said. He left without another word. The healer waited until his footsteps had faded down the corridor, and then looked at Maren with the same brief, calculating expression as before. "That's the king," she said. "I gathered," Maren said. "He hasn't come to my quarters in the middle of the night in 4 years." Maren looked at the fire. The pups must have mattered to him. The healer made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, and went back to her work. Maren stayed where she was, hands pressed flat against her knees, and watched the smallest pup breathe. She filed the look away, the particular quality of it, the way it had lasted a beat too long. She didn't know what to do with it yet. She set it aside and concentrated on the breathing. Morning came gray and cold, and all 3 pups were alive. Maren was still in the healer's quarters when the summons came. Not a formal document, just a pack member at the door with the message that the king would see her in the main hall before she left. She washed her face in cold water, straightened her coat, and went. The main hall was stone and high-ceilinged, with the particular acoustic quality of a room that had absorbed centuries of difficult conversations. He was standing at the far end near a window, not at a table, which she noted. Standing rather than sitting meant the meeting was not meant to be long, or meant he hadn't decided yet how long it should be. "The pups," he said, when she was close enough. "They were from this territory. I assumed. There are people in this pack who would prefer I didn't have heirs." He said it plainly, without drama, the way you state weather. The Pups were my sister's children. She died 3 months ago. Their father is from the eastern border. He has no interest in raising wolves that carry my bloodline. Maren absorbed this. And the chain was a message. His jaw was tight. One I received. She stood with that for a moment. Outside the window, she could see the yard below. Wolves moving through morning routines, breath fogging in the cold, the ordinary industry of a pack at work. None of them were looking up. But several of them had gone slightly still in the particular way she had noticed when she walked through the gate last night, a collective adjustment. Like a room of people all turning toward a sound they hadn't consciously heard. "You can stay," he said, "if you want to. The pups will need consistent care for the next few weeks. The healer is good, but she's one person." "I am an unaffiliated Omega," Maren said. "Your council will have thoughts about that." "My council has thoughts about everything." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, close enough to file away. "That doesn't make them right." "I don't have pack law protection here," she said. "If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," he said. Flat and final, no explanation offered, none needed, in the way of a man who had learned that certainty delivered quietly was more convincing than certainty delivered loudly. Maren looked at him for a moment. He looked back. "I'll stay," she said. "For the pups." "For the pups," he said. Neither of them said anything else about it. 3 days passed in the rhythm of the healer's quarters, feeding schedules and temperature checks and the specific vigilance of watching small things that had nearly not survived learn to be loud about wanting to. The smallest pup, who Maren had privately named Frost because she had found her in it and she seemed determined to outlast it, developed a personality on the second day that was entirely disproportionate to her size. She was demanding. She was relentless. She bit Maren's thumb every single feeding and seemed to consider this a necessary part of the process. Maren found it difficult not to admire her. He came to the healer's quarters each morning, not for long, 10 minutes, sometimes 15, and always with the quality of a man who had a reason to be there that was entirely separate from any other reason he might have. He asked about the pups. He listened to the healer's reports. He stood near the table where they slept in a pile and looked at them with the expression of someone who was being very careful about how much they let themselves want something. On the 4th morning he came and the healer was out. It was just Maren at the table with Frost in her lap and the other two sleeping in a heap by the fire. He stopped in the doorway. "She's eating," Maren said, because someone had to say something and she had learned that she was usually the one to do it. Aggressively, "I'm going to have a scar." He came in and stood on the other side of the table. He looked at Frost. Frost looked back at him with the absolute confidence of a creature who had decided the world owed her something and intended to collect. "She looks like her mother," he said. Maren didn't say anything. She held Frost and let the silence do what it needed to do. "My sister's name was Vielle," he said. "She was 23. "I'm sorry," Maren said. He nodded once. The kind of nod that acknowledges receipt without claiming to have processed the contents. He reached out and touched Frost's head with 2 fingers. A brief, careful gesture, the kind that was trying not to be more than it was. Frost bit him. He made a sound. It was very small and completely undignified, and Maren looked away at the fire so she didn't do something inadvisable with her face. "She does that to everyone," Maren said. "I see that," he said, and when she looked back, there was something in his expression that was warm in a way that seemed to surprise him. He looked at it for a moment, that warmth, and then looked away. She filed it away. The surprise of it, the way he had looked at it like something he had not expected to find. On the 6th day, the council came. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all older, all carrying the particular authority of people who had been in their positions long enough to have stopped distinguishing between their personal preferences and institutional policy. They arrived at the healer's quarters in the late afternoon, and the lead counselor, a man named Aldrich, with careful enunciation and a voice like smooth river stone, explained that the matter of the unaffiliated Omega required formal review. Maren set Frost down, stood up, and looked at him. "Your name," Aldrich said. "Maren. Territory of origin. Unaffiliated. I've moved through 6 territories in the last 4 years. You have no pack claim." "No. And yet you are currently residing within the Northern Reach, which has been closed to outside wolves for 6 years under territorial protection order." He paused to let this land. "You understand the legal position this creates." "I understand that I was invited to stay by the king," Maren said, "to care for 3 pups who were found chained to a border post in freezing temperatures. I was under the impression that was the more pressing legal matter." Aldrich's eyes moved to the king, who was standing at the far side of the room with his arms crossed and an expression that was doing a great deal of work appearing neutral. "The pups are a separate matter," Aldrich said. "I'm not sure they are," Maren said. "Someone tried to kill 3 infant wolves who carry the king's bloodline. I found them. I brought them in. I've been keeping them alive for 6 days. If the council's primary concern right now is my territorial status, I'd be interested to understand the reasoning." The silence in the room had a particular texture. Several of the council members were looking at her with expressions that were recalibrating. "The girl stays," the king said. He said it the way he said everything, flat and final, each word set down like something with weight. "She is here under my invitation and my protection. If the council wishes to discuss territorial jurisdiction, we can schedule a formal session. This is not that session." Aldrich looked at him for a moment. "The council will note its concern." "The council may note whatever it likes," the king said. "She stays." They left. The healer, who had been very busy with something at the back of the room throughout the entire exchange, waited until the door closed and then set down whatever she had been holding. "That was the first time he's spoken in a council meeting in 8 months, she said. Maren looked at the door. "He speaks at council meetings." "He attends them," the healer said. "It's not the same thing." That night, Maren sat by the fire for a long time after the pups were settled and thought about the way he had said it. Not the words, the timing of them. He had waited until she had finished speaking. He had let her make her own argument, and then he had added his weight to it rather than replacing it with his own. She had been in rooms with powerful men for most of her adult life, and she was trying to remember if that had happened before. She was still thinking about it when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. They stopped outside the door. They stayed there for a long moment, long enough that she counted to 11 before she stopped counting, and then they moved away. She looked at the door. She filed it away without knowing what she was filing it under yet. 2 more days passed. On the 8th day, she found him in the yard at dawn, moving stone from one side of a collapsed outbuilding to the other, which was not what she had expected to find a king doing at dawn. He was working without his coat, which seemed inadvisable given the temperature, and he had the focused quality of a man doing physical labor because he needed to be doing something with his hands. She watched from the yard entrance for a moment. He knew she was there. She was certain of it, the way his movements shifted slightly, a fraction of additional precision. But he didn't turn around. "The Eastern counselor came to see me this morning," she said. "The one who wasn't Aldrich. She offered me safe passage out of the territory and a letter of recommendation to a pack in the south." He set down the stone he was holding. He didn't turn around. She said it would be better for everyone, Maren said. She was very pleasant about it. What did you tell her? His voice was even. She couldn't read the evenness. I told her I'd think about it. He turned around. His face was doing the controlled thing. The particular blankness that she had learned was not actually blankness, but a very thin surface over something that was moving quickly underneath. And have you, he said, thought about it? I'm thinking about it now, Maren said. I thought you should know it was offered. He looked at her for a moment. The gray of his eyes had gone quieter, which she had noticed happened when he was working something through, rather than suppressing it. Why? Because you told the council I was here under your protection, she said. That means something was offered on my behalf. You should know what's being done with it. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly. Something more careful than relief. Something that had examined relief and decided it was too early for that, but was holding the door open. You're not leaving, he said. I didn't say that. You came to tell me about the offer, he said. You didn't come to tell me you were taking it. She held his gaze. He held hers. The yard was cold and the morning was gray, and somewhere in the healer's quarters frost was probably biting someone. The pups still need watching, Maren said. They do, he said. Then I'll stay, she said, for now. He nodded. He picked up the stone he had set down and went back to work. She stood in the yard entrance for another moment and then went back inside. And neither of them said anything about the fact that they had just had a conversation that was entirely about something other than what it appeared to be about. 3 more weeks passed. The pups grew. Frost became a problem in the specific way that very competent, very small things become problems. She was everywhere. She was fast. She had opinions about every room in the healer's quarters and several rooms she had not technically been given access to. The other 2, whom the healer had named Briar and Cole because she said someone had to be practical about it, developed their own personalities with the speed of creatures who had decided to make up for lost time. Maren stayed. She told herself each week that she was staying for the pups. By the 3rd week, she had stopped telling herself anything and simply stayed. He came to the healer's quarters each morning. The visits had grown longer without either of them formally extending them. They talked about the pups and then they talked about other things, the territory, the border disputes, the Eastern Council's ongoing campaign of polite obstruction, the history of the Reach that she was learning through the simple accumulation of being in it. He talked in the careful way of someone who had been quiet for a long time and was relearning that speaking didn't necessarily mean loss. She listened in the way she had always listened, cataloging, filing, noting the places where his voice changed and the subjects where it didn't. On a Wednesday in the 4th week, she found him in the scriptorium, which she had not known he used. He was reading something old. She could tell by the way he was holding it. The particular care of someone handling a thing that might not survive being handled. He looked up when she came in and didn't seem surprised to see her. Pack lineage records, he said, before she asked. I'm trying to find the pups' formal registration. Their mother's line is here. Their father's is complicated. Can I help? Maren said. She had spent 4 years moving through territories doing exactly this kind of work. The reading of old records, the tracing of lines that people had tried to obscure. It was how she had survived without a pack. She was useful in archives. He looked at her for a moment. You can read old pack script? I can read 6 territorial scripts, she said. Old pack is the 3rd one I learned. He slid the record toward her. She sat down across from him and began to read. They worked for 3 hours. She found what he was looking for in the 2nd hour, the registration line, the formal acknowledgement of the pup's lineage through Vale, the legal provision that made them wards of the Pack King in the absence of a surviving parent. She read it to him, and he listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the page, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "That makes them mine," he said, formally. "Yes. I haven't—" He stopped, started again. "I haven't had anyone to be formally responsible for in a long time." Maren set the record down carefully. Outside the scriptorium window, the yard was gray, and a light snow had started, the kind that wasn't serious yet, but was considering it. "You had a mate," she said. It was not a question. She had been holding the shape of it for weeks. The particular quality of his control, the way he held warmth at arm's length, and then looked surprised when it reached him anyway. The 6 years of closed borders and silence, and a king who had stopped naming things. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the record in her hands. "She left," he said, 4 months after the naming ceremony. She said the bond was not what she had expected, that it was too much, that she needed a life that wasn't— He paused. She used the word consumed. Maren was quiet. "Pack law allows it," he said. "A mate can dissolve a bond if both parties agree. I agreed because I didn't know what else to do." He looked at his hands, flat on the table. "I closed the borders because I didn't want to. I couldn't." He stopped again. "I didn't want to do it again? Name something and have it leave." The snow outside was coming down more seriously now. The fire in the scriptorium had burned low. Maren reached over and added a piece of wood to it without thinking, the automatic gesture of someone who had spent weeks keeping fires going in this territory, and then sat back and looked at him. "I'm afraid," she said, "that you'll spend the rest of your life waiting for me to leave and miss the part where I don't." He looked up. "I'm not her," Maren said. "I don't know what she needed or why she left or whether she was right to. I know that I have been in 6 territories in 4 years without a single place that felt like I was supposed to be in it." She held his gaze. "I know that I found 3 pups in the dark and walked them to your border, and I haven't wanted to leave since. I know that I count things when I'm nervous, and I have not counted anything in 3 weeks." The silence was the stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing. "I don't know how to do this without being afraid of it," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you not to be afraid. I'm asking you to name it anyway." He looked at her for a long time. The fire caught and built behind her. Outside, the snow came down in the particular silence of snow that has decided to stay. "Friday," he said. "There's a naming ceremony on Friday. Pack assembly. The council will be there." He paused. "I'd like to name the pups formally. Register them as wards." Another pause. Longer. "And I would like to name you, if you're willing." "As what?" Maren said. He looked at her steadily. "As mine," he said. "If you'll have it." She held the moment. She let it be what it was, enormous and quiet, and terrifying in the specific way that good things are terrifying when you have spent a long time not having them. "All right," she said. "Friday." Friday came with frost on the stone and a sky the color of iron, and the entire pack assembled in the main yard in the particular stillness of wolves who knew something significant was about to be said. Maren stood at the edge of the assembly with Frost in her arms because Frost had made it very clear that she intended to be present and had bitten 3 people who suggested otherwise. The council was there. All 5 of them, Aldrich with his smooth voice and careful face, the Eastern counselor who had offered Maren the letter of recommendation and was now standing with the expression of someone revising their position. They stood in a formal line near the front, and they were quiet. He stood at the center of the yard. He was not in ceremonial dress, which Maren had half expected. He was in what he wore every day, the dark coat and the worn leather, the build of a man who had been doing actual work. He looked like the yard had been built around him. He looked like he had been standing there for years. The pack went still. He spoke the formal words for the pups first. The lineage acknowledgement, the ward registration, the names. Frost, Briar, Cole, spoken in the old pack script that made them real and recorded and permanent. When he said Frost's name, something moved through the assembled pack, a collective exhale, the sound of a pack that had been holding its breath and had finally been given permission to release it. Then he turned and looked at Maren. "I name Maren of No Territory as mate and pack member of the Northern Reach," he said. "Witnessed by this assembly, recorded in pack law, and held under my protection as king. This bond is named." He paused. "It is named willingly." The last two words were not in the formal script. She knew because she had read the formal script 3 days ago in the scriptorium, and those words were not in it. They were his own addition, which meant they were not ceremony. They were truth. Maren walked to him. She stood in front of him and looked up, and he looked down, and the pack around them went very still in the way of wolves who have stopped pretending to be otherwise. "Witnessed," she said, her own word, her own addition. He reached out and took her hand. Not a ceremony gesture, just a hand, offered open, waiting to see what she did with it. She held it. Behind them, somewhere in the assembled pack, someone struck their fist to their chest. Then another. Then the sound spread through the yard like a wave moving through still water, fist after fist, the pack acknowledging what had been named, and Frost, held against Maren's side, bit the edge of her coat in what Maren chose to interpret as approval. Later, when the assembly had dispersed and the council had filed out with the expressions of people who were already drafting formal notes, and the pups had been settled by the fire with the healer who had the look of someone deeply satisfied with how things had gone, Maren and the king stood in the corridor outside the healer's quarters. And the quiet was the particular quiet of two people who have just done something irreversible and are finding that it feels less like falling than they expected. "The fire in the East Wing is inadequate," she said. "I've been meaning to say something about it." He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll have it looked at." "I'll look at it," she said. "I know where the wood is." He was quiet for a moment. "Before you cross the courtyard," he said. "The first night, when the gate guard sent word and I came to the healer's quarters." He paused. "I knew before I came through the door. I could feel—" He stopped. "I knew." Maren looked at him. "I didn't know until the scriptorium," she said, "when you showed me the records." "I know," he said. "I was there." "You knew I didn't know?" "Yes." She thought about that, about him carrying it for 4 weeks, the weight of knowing and saying nothing and waiting. She thought about footsteps in a corridor at night that stopped outside a door and didn't knock. She thought about a man who had learned that naming things meant losing them, choosing to wait until she found it herself. That, she said, was either very patient or very cowardly. "Probably both," he said. "I've been told I'm capable of both simultaneously." She laughed. It was a small sound, surprised out of her, and he looked at it the way he had looked at the warmth in his own face 4 weeks ago, like something he had not expected to find and was not sure yet what to do with. But this time, he didn't look away from it. Inside the healer's quarters, Frost made a sound that was loud and demanding and entirely certain that the world owed her something. "She needs feeding," Maren said. "She always needs feeding," he said. "Yes," Maren said, "she's going to be a problem." "She already is," he said, and held the door open, and Maren walked through it, and the fire inside was burning well, and the 3 pups were alive, and the territory outside the window was settling into the particular quiet of a winter night that has nothing left to brace against. And that's where we leave them. A king who closed his borders for 6 years because naming something out loud meant it could leave. and an Omega who walked out of the dark with 3 dying pups and didn't know she was already written into what happened next. I need to know what you thought of Maren, specifically that moment in the scriptorium where she tells him she's afraid he'll spend the rest of his life waiting for her to leave, and miss the part where she doesn't. Drop it in the comments. Did that land for you, or was there a moment that hit harder? If this story found you tonight, share it with someone who needs a good love story. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. I'll see you then.